everyone. This is Professor Benjamin, and this session will be covering ethnicity. Typically, we cover it around this time of the semester, and it is sometimes in my 15-week course, it's covered in week 10. Sometimes in my 10-week courses, it's covered earlier. So it all depends on what length of the semester you're kind of covering this. So right under the ethnicity description, there's not a lot about ethnicity in the online textbook, but here is 3.5 and 3.6 talks about ethnicity, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it. But I want to walk you through some of the additional articles under Session 10, so scroll down. There is the Supreme Court during the last census, which was 2020, because it's every 10 years, it was the thought process that Hispanic would be used as a race. And this came under a lot of chatter and talk, whether Hispanic should be included as a race. Right now, Hispanic is not considered as a race on when you check your box as to what your race is. Census people tell people you check whatever you mostly identify with, whether that is black or whether that is white, and then you can go a little bit further down, but Hispanic has never been included as one of those races, so it hasn't been a choice, white, black, Hispanic. It's only been white or black, and then from there you choose a little bit further information. So there has been a lot of chatter lately as to whether to add Hispanic as a race. And I think that question will still keep coming up in the future. The other thing that came up in the last census, and this came up under President Trump's administration, was that he wanted to add a question to the census. But the law, remember, this filling out the census is a Constitution. It's a violation of your Constitution of the United States Constitution if you do not fill out the census, just so everyone knows. The census is required to be a specific amount of questions. So if we add a question to the census, we need to remove a question from the census. And so this is important because if we want to add a question, then we have to remove something. And a lot of that other additional identifying information is really important for us in terms of federal funding, etc., for areas of the United States. So Trump wanted to add a question about citizenship, whether you were a legal or illegal citizen of the United States. And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. It was like a nail biter because the census, remember, is done every 10 years. And he brought it up at the last minute, had to go all the way to the Supreme Court. And it was like, oh my gosh, like if we don't get the census information out, we're violating the Constitution, right? It was shot down by the Supreme Court that question would not be asked because a lot of people understand and know that is a very hot topic, and people did not want that included because I think it would deter people from filling out the census. Even though you're required to fill out the census, people wouldn't do that. So that was a big deal. And then there's a couple other things here that we're going to cover. One of them is the difference between what genocide and ethnic cleansing is. The lines are blurred on those two terms, but there are differences between the two. Ethnic cleansing is not covered under international law. Genocide is. So there's a couple things there. It's really hard to actually, it's really, really hard to prove either one of them because you need so much information and a lot of photographs and digital content, but digital content can be edited. So there's just a lot involved with really kind of trying and convicting war crimes. Okay, and so that's a lot here. So I'm going to move into the PowerPoint, which is here. So here we go. All right. So one thing is we need to know the definition. What is the definition of ethnicity? So it's an identity with a group of people who share cultural traditions of a particular homeland or hearth. It is often confused with the term race. Okay, which traditionally has been thought of as an identity with a group of people who share a biological ancestor. Okay, now don't forget, race is a social construct. So the fact that I call you white or you African American is a social construct. Really, biologically, we're all Homo sapiens, so we all fall under the same genus and species. But we as people have created this social construct to divide people even further, and that is considered race. So deals more with the biological side of it. Ethnicity deals more with the cultural side of it. Okay, so really important. So of course, ethnicity and race in the United States is a big thing. And again, this is the census question. It is shows real difficulty in distinguishing between ethnicity and race. Former President Barack Obama illustrates the complexity of designating race and ethnicity in the United States. Remember, there was a whole big talk about President Obama. You guys may not remember this, but former President Trump really attacked President Obama for his both of his race and ethnicity, and made him like show his birth certificate for things. So this is definitely a topic, and the more and more the United States becomes a melting pot, the more and more these questions keep coming up. And of course, a lot of this has to do with nationalism. So white nationalists want purebred white nationalism, right? And that's where you see a lot of right-wing ideals coming into the conversation. And it will become a hot topic for the future of the United States. So here's what the census typically looks like. So there's two questions here. Number one is the person of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin? And you click yes or no. And then they ask you your race. So what people want is this to be considered under here, instead of you then having to pick. So you might check, yes, I'm Hispanic, but then you have to choose from this list here. And you're like, but Hispanic is not on here. And so it's forcing you to choose something that you're just like not sure of. So we just tell everyone, you need to choose what you feel the most comfortable with. So choose one of these that you feel you identify the most with in terms of your race. Okay, so just so you know, it is definitely always under consideration. In the United States, we have a lot of distribution of ethnicities because, of course, we are a melting pot. So I'm going to talk about three main ethnic groups that are in the United States, right? And you may say to me, well, okay, African Americans are a race. Yes, they are, but they also have ethnic enclaves. So they have areas where there are traditionally African American populations. And of course, some of this has to do with where, unfortunately, African Americans were brought in through the slave trade industry, right? Where they were brought in. And typically what we find is that a lot of ethnicities and races stay exactly where they are when they come into the United States. So they don't typically transfer out. So you'll see here that African Americans are clustered in the Southeast. And this is typically because of slavery. The next one that we're going to look at is Asian Americans, and Asian Americans are typically clustered on the western part of the United States. And of course, this is because it's very close to Asian countries where individuals migrated into the United States and typically stayed where they migrated into. And again, a lot of ethnic enclaves are formed in these areas where individuals that share ethnicities and races live in the same pockets because you feel more comfortable with people that you can identify with. The next one is Hispanics, and they're clustered in the Southwest, especially Arizona, Mexico, New Mexico, Texas, California. And of course, this is the same thing, is there's a lot of immigration from Mexico and South America into the United States, and this is where individuals typically stay. So they are three distributions of ethnicities in the United States, and you can visually see where they are and why they are there, and that's probably going to be a question on the final exam. So make sure you look at that. The next thing that we're going to talk about is that term ethnic enclave that I just talked about a little bit. It's a place with a high concentration of an ethnic group that is distinct from those in the surrounding areas. And typically these enclaves offer newcomers economic support, employment opportunities, affordable housing, and loans because you identify with the individuals who live close to you. Ethnoburbs are the distribution of those ethnic enclaves has changed over time. Ethnic enclaves of recent immigrants in cities have shifted to their descendants moving to the suburbs, sometimes called ethnoburbs. So typically what would happen is this ethnic enclave would form, and then individuals from that ethnic enclave would then break off and move into the suburbs around the city, and then we would call that an ethnoburb. So it's like a suburb, but with a specific ethnicity that lives within that burb. Okay? All right. So the next couple slides talk to us about African American migration in the United States and the why individuals of African American descent are typically located where they're located. And so you want to look through the African American migration. And in these 2 slides, I talk about segregation, blockbusting, and redlining, which I've also talked about in previous in political geography, session 6. So you want to go back and look at that information. I'm running a little bit out of time, so that's why I'm kind of moving forward a little bit in terms of what this terminology means. We did already talk about nationality under political geography. So if you want to go back and review what nationality is, important to know, and that loyalty, nationalism. I want to skip a little bit so you can look at a couple of these. And what a multi-ethnic state is a state that has multiple ethnicities within it. So that's important to know, is that states that have, or countries that have multiple ethnicities in it can become problematic sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes, because individuals cannot get along, right? Individuals want the power for their ethnic group. And this can create a lot of problems. And that's where we're going to move into genocide and ethnic cleansing. So the next couple slides talk about it. So ethnic cleansing is the systematic forced removal of ethnic, racial, and religious groups from a given area with the intent of making a region ethnically homogeneous, which means they don't want other ethnicities in that area. They want their ethnicity to be the greatest. Okay. Along with direct removal, extermination, deportation, or population transfer, it also includes indirect methods aimed at forced migration by coercing the victim group to flee and preventing its return, such as murder, rape, or property destruction. So while we are typically hear and see on the news about going in and wiping out, unfortunately, an entire ethnic group, there are also indirect ways where they may go into a village and they may rape all of the women in the village and the young girls, or they may go into villages and burn the entire village. And with that comes fear, right? And the idea is then you decide you don't want to live there anymore, or you're forced to migrate. And that is what we would consider ethnic cleansing. It constitutes a crime against humanity, and it falls under what we call the Genocide Convention. Unfortunately, ethnic cleansing does not fall under international criminal law. And this is a big issue because it's very hard to prosecute if it's not under international law. How are you supposed to prosecute individuals who perform ethnic cleansings? Okay, so something to think about. Genocide, on the other hand, was first defined in 1948 in the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Crimes of Genocide. And in this treaty, it outlines 5 acts that constitute genocide, okay? If they are done with the intent to destroy an ethnic, national, racial, or religious group. So the killing of members of a group, causing serious bodily or mental harm, deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about the group's physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births, forcibly transferring children. So notice that these are very vague terminologies. So it becomes very hard to prosecute because they're very vague. So to qualify as genocide, the actions must be done with the intent to eliminate an entire group of people. And without proving that intent, that it was meant to kill the entire ethnic group, right, then you can't prosecute it. And this is where it becomes really hard to actually convict individuals of genocide or ethnic cleansing, okay? And this is why it can be done. And this is why it continues to be done on such a mass, happens to a mass amount of group of people, because the individuals who are conducting the genocides or the ethnic cleansings know that it's really hard to prosecute, and most likely they will not be convicted of the crime. Okay, so really important for you to understand. So a couple other things here. I go into a couple ethnic cleansings as well as genocides, examples of those. So you want to take a look at those as you move through the rest of the modules. And some of these are still taking place today. So really important, especially right now in Rwanda, there's a lot taking place there now that can be considered ethnic cleansings or genocide. So you want to take a look at those and make sure you understand the difference between the two.